1,200 years after the Great Cataclysm, the Kana tribe lived in the heart of the Middle Valley. Their settlement lay in an ancient riverbed, surrounded by vast forests. The tribe revered the ancient caves, seeing them as both sacred and cursed. No one dared step inside them. Those who did were believed to be damned, cast out from the tribe forever. One night, the tribe gathered around a great fire in the center of their camp. The hunting season had been unkind, and their food stores were nearly gone. Just then a shadow emerged from the darkness. A stranger stepped forward, clad in worn yet impressive leather garments, a large satchel slung over his shoulder. "My name is Arin," he said, his voice steady and knowing. "I am a storyteller and a traveler. If you grant me the warmth of your fire, I will share with you a tale of ancient secrets." The tribe's leader, Morga, was cautious, but desperation gnawed at his people. If this traveler held any knowledge that could help them survive, he had no choice but to listen. As the fire crackled, Arin spoke of a place deep in the southern mountains, an ancient cave containing a crystal known as the Bloodstone. "This crystal holds sacred power," Arin explained. "With it, your tribe may endure the coming hardships, but entering the cave comes at a great cost." Morga knew the risk, but his people had little choice. He selected Kael, a young but fearless hunter, to retrieve the Bloodstone. Kael had been raised to fear the caves, to avoid them at all costs. But for his tribe, he was willing to defy that belief. Alongside him, he took Lia, a skilled tracker and healer, known for her deep knowledge of plants and the land. Their journey led them through jagged mountain passes and mist-laden forests. Strange eyes watched them from the shadows, though no figures could be seen. "We are being followed," Lia whispered. "The spirits of the cave's guardians." On the third day, they arrived at the entrance. Massive stone pillars surrounded. The cave's mouth covered in moss and carved with eerie symbols. "These are warnings," Lia murmured, tracing her fingers over the stone. "Whoever enters will lose their soul." Kael swallowed his fear and stepped inside. The air was thick with moisture, and a strange whispering sound echoed from deep within. It felt as if the cave itself was alive, murmuring secrets in an ancient tongue. Further in, they found scattered bones, most unmistakably human. Then, in the cave's depths, they saw it. The Bloodstone rested atop a raised platform, glowing with an eerie red light, pulsing like a heartbeat. An invisible force seemed to hum around it, pressing against their very souls. But as Kael reached for the crystal, the shadows stirred. From the darkness, a figure emerged, human in form but with eyes as black as the void. The Guardian, without a word. It struck. A spear lashed out at Kael, forcing him back. Lia lunged, her knife flashing in the dim light, but the Guardian only seemed to grow stronger with each attack. Kael's mind raced. How could they defeat something that only became more powerful with every strike? Then his eyes fell upon the Bloodstone's carvings, ancient symbols, cryptic yet familiar. A realization struck him. The stone feeds on blood, he thought. Maybe that's the key. With no time to second-guess, Kael drew his hunting knife and sliced his palm, pressing his bleeding hand against the Bloodstone. The crystal drank his blood eagerly. A piercing scream echoed through the cave. As the Guardian trembled, its form distorting. Within moments it vanished into the void. But Kael's price was heavy. His arm from the elbow down had turned to stone. Weakened but victorious, they carried the Bloodstone back to the tribe. At first, it seemed to be a blessing. Their hunters grew stronger, their land more fertile. But soon the elders sensed something was wrong. An aged shaman, eyes clouded with wisdom and fear, warned Kael, "This crystal. It is merely a fragment of something far older, a remnant of a power that predates even the Great Cataclysm. If left unchecked, it may bring ruin upon us all." And the Bloodstone had begun to whisper. Kael could hear it, resonating within his petrified arm. A voice, ancient and knowing, called to him. It spoke of another cave far greater and more dangerous than the last. A choice lay before him. Lia, standing at his side, urged caution. "This stone has already saved our tribe. Why risk more? Maybe we should find a way to destroy it before it destroys us." Kael clenched his fist, feeling the stone pulse beneath his skin. But this stone led us here. Maybe where it wants to take us is where we were always meant to go. The fire crackled, the whispers grew louder. The journey was far from over. Kael felt a slight tingling sensation in his stone arm as he turned to Lia. The power of the stone helped our tribe, yes, but following its guidance might lead us into the unknown. For now, we should stay here and observe its effects. Lia nodded. You're right, but we need to figure out how to keep this stone under control. If it falls into the wrong hands, she trailed off, for Kael felt the same unease. They decided to hide the stone in the remnants of an old temple at the heart of the tribe's territory. The temple was said to have been connected to some kind of energy from the caves before the Great Ruin. However, once the stone was placed in the temple, a strange mist began to form around it. This mist spread beyond the tribe's boundaries, and hunters reported hearing voices within it, whispering from nowhere. One evening, Chief Morga approached Kael and said, "The peace this stone brought seems short-lived. The mist is growing and we're receiving reports of strange figures moving within it beyond our borders." Kael knew he had to make a decision. The stone's power was bringing danger along with it. Kael turned to Lia after a brief discussion with Chief Morga. "The mist is growing. This isn't natural. If these figures are a threat, we need to know what we're up against." Lia checked her blade and gave a faint smile. "If we're heading into the mist, we'd better be prepared." "This won't be easy." Kael and Lia ventured toward the forest's edge, where the mist was thickest. The silence was deafening. There were no bird calls or sounds of nocturnal creatures. Kael felt a surge of energy in his stone arm, as if the stone was guiding them. Somewhere. After some time, they noticed silhouettes emerging within the mist. At first they seemed human, but as they got closer, Kael and Lia saw their eyes were completely black, and their skin was as hard as stone. One of the figures stepped forward, its movements heavy and deliberate. "Turn back," it said in a guttural voice. "These lands are not yours." Kael gripped his sword tightly. "Whatever threatens this tribe, we've come to face it. Tell us who or what you are." The figure ignored Kael's demand. Moments later, more figures emerged from the mist. 5 of them surrounded Kael and Lia as their leader continued. "The stone feeds on the blood of those who guard it. Leave now, before you cause further harm." Kael slowly lowered his sword and took a step forward. Lia, still on high alert, allowed him to take the lead. "We don't want to fight," Kael said, his voice firm yet calm. "Who are you, and why are you protecting this stone?" One of the figures tilted its head slightly. "We are the ancient guardians. We exist to keep the stone's power from falling into the wrong hands. You have disturbed its peace." Lia took a step closer to the figures and asked, "You see that this stone has helped our tribe, but if it's dangerous, tell us how to control it. We want to know what we should do with it." The leader of the figures remained silent for a moment. Then a faint glow appeared within the mist. A strange energy spread toward Kael's stone arm. The figure turned to Kael and said, "The stone is now a part of you. If you wish to control it, you must find its source, but doing so will require a great sacrifice." Kael frowned. "Where is this source?" The figure turned its gaze into the distance and spoke in a quiet tone. "Deep within the caves hidden before the great ruin lies a temple. There the stone's true nature will be revealed, but at the end of that path you may lose everything." Kael took a deep breath and locked eyes with the leader of the figures. "If this stone's power is truly tied to me, then I must learn to control it. I will go to the temple." Lia hesitated for a moment before turning to Kael. "You're not going alone. The path will be dangerous, and I'm not letting you face it by yourself." The leader of the figures nodded in approval. "The path to the temple is long and filled with challenges, but only there will you understand how the stone controls you. Be prepared for loss along the way." Kael and Lia followed the direction the figures had pointed out, moving through the mist and into a deep forest. The forest was unlike any ordinary place. The branches of the trees twisted into unnatural shapes, their trunks etched with glowing ancient symbols. With every step, Kael's stone arm grew heavier, as if the stone itself could sense the temple. Eventually they came upon a deep chasm. On the other side was an ancient bridge, barely hanging by rotting ropes and decaying wooden planks. Lia turned to Kael, speaking cautiously. This bridge looks ancient. If we try to cross it right away, it might collapse. We should test its strength first. Kael nodded. You're right. Let's see if it can handle any weight. Lia approached the edge of the bridge and carefully inspected the ropes and planks. Many of the planks were rotting, but a few still appeared sturdy. She picked up a short branch she had carried and pressed it against a few of the planks, applying some weight. The rope strained slightly but didn't break. Some of the planks might hold, Lia said, but we need to be careful. Crossing one at a time is the safest option. Kael stepped closer, his heavy stone arm brushing against the first plank. He tapped it lightly, testing its strength. The plank seemed sturdy enough, but as they looked further down the bridge, they noticed a section in the middle where the wood had almost completely rotted. Kael took a deep breath. One of us should. Go ahead and check the path, I'll start. Kael looked at Lia and gave a faint smile. We're safer together. If the bridge can hold us, we'll find out slowly and carefully. Lia nodded. All right. Let's match our steps and move cautiously. If one of us slips, the other can help. The two moved to the edge of the bridge. Their first steps were tense. The rope strained slightly and the planks creaked under their weight. Lia adjusted her movements to balance the weight of Kael's stone arm. As they progressed, they approached the center of the bridge. Suddenly, one of the ropes snapped, causing the bridge to lurch to one side. Kael instinctively grabbed Lia's arm. Don't move, he commanded. Both of them clung tightly to the side ropes to maintain their balance. The bridge was still holding, but it was unclear how much more weight it could bear. Lia took a deep breath. The bridge is under too much tension. If another rope snaps, we'll fall. One of us needs to move ahead quickly to secure the path. Kael nodded. All right, you go. You're lighter. I'll keep the balance here. Kael saw the fear in Lia's eyes as she glanced toward the other side of the bridge. The energy from his stone arm was growing stronger. He turned to her with determination in his voice. You're lighter. If this bridge gives out, we'll both fall. I'm going to get you across. Lia stared at him in disbelief. You're going to throw me. Kael, that's insane. What if you miss? Kael gave a small grin. If this arm is good for anything, it's now. Are you ready? Lia hesitated, but then nodded, gripping tightly onto Kael's stone arm. Kael took a deep breath, gathering all his strength, and hurled Lia toward the sturdier end of the bridge. As she flew through the air, Kael's voice echoed behind her. Grab the rope. Lia managed to catch hold of a rope near the end of the bridge and landed safely on the other side. As Kael let out a sigh of relief, the bridge began to shake, violently. The planks beneath him cracked loudly. He realized he had to move quickly before the entire bridge collapsed. Kael heard the planks beneath him cracking loudly as the bridge began to give way. Time was running out. Lia called to him from the safe side. Move, Kael, it's not going to hold. Kael gripped his stone arm tightly and took a deep breath. Energy surged through his arm, almost as if it was pushing him forward. He unleashed the power and used all his strength to make a massive leap. As he soared through the air, he saw the section of the bridge behind him collapse completely. Kael reached out with his stone arm as he descended, grabbing onto one of the sturdier planks. Near the safe side, Lia quickly rushed over to pull him up. Once Kael was safely across, he let out a deep breath. Lia smiled at him, laughing nervously. Are you always going to scare us like this? Kael gave a faint grin. Only when it's necessary. Kael and Lia pushed through the thick underbrush of the forest. The energy in Kael's stone arm was growing stronger, almost distracting him. Lia broke the silence. Something's wrong here. It feels like the stone is calling out to something. At that moment, a deep growl echoed from the forest. Emerging. From the shadows was a massive creature. Its skin was dark grey and appeared as hard as stone. Its eyes glowed red, resembling the color of the bloodstone. The creature paused briefly before letting out a thunderous roar and charging at Kael. Kael drew his sword, while Lia quickly readied her bow. The creature moved with incredible speed. Kael used his stone arm to block the creature's massive claws, but each blow sent him staggering backward. This thing is reacting to the stone's energy, Lia shouted as she loosed an arrow into the creature's leg. Kael struck the creature with his stone arm, aiming to distract it. When his fist connected with the creature's chest, A surge of energy erupted from the stone, forcing the creature to stumble back a few steps. Lia seized the opportunity and fired another arrow directly into the creature's chest. The beast staggered for a moment before rising again, looking even more enraged. Kael realized he would have to harness the stone's power more effectively to defeat it. Kael rushed forward to draw the creature's attention, while Lia stepped back to plan her next move. "We need to slow it down," Lia shouted. "It's too fast." Kael used his stone arm to block the creature's claws and threw a powerful punch into its abdomen. The creature staggered briefly, but quickly recovered. Lia seized the opportunity and fired an arrow into the back of its left leg, targeting the joint to hinder its movement. "I hit its leg, Kael. Now strike." Kael lunged at the creature, delivering another blow to its chest with his stone arm. The creature roared in anger and swung its massive tail, knocking Kael several feet away. He rolled but quickly got back on his feet. Lia fired a few more arrows, aiming to distract the creature. One arrow struck its eye, and the beast howled in pain. This gave Kael the opening he needed. Focusing the energy in his stone arm, he prepared for one final strike. Lia yelled, "Now's your chance!" Kael leaped forward and delivered a crushing blow to the creature's head. The energy from the stone erupted, sending a shockwave through the air. The creature collapsed to the ground, letting out a low growl before falling silent. Kael stared at the motionless body of the creature, feeling a faint tingling sensation in his stone arm. Lia approached cautiously, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "This thing isn't a normal creature," Lia said. "It looks like it's tied to the stone's energy." Kael nodded. "Its eyes and skin, they resemble the bloodstone. But why would it react to the stone's power?" Lia pulled one of her arrows from the creature's chest and examined it closely. The creature's skin was hardened like stone, and its veins glowed faintly with a reddish energy. Lia noticed that this energy seemed stronger when the creature was alive. "This energy, it's similar to what the stone emits," Lia said, "but it's cruder, uncontrolled. It's like this creature is some sort of byproduct of the stone." Kael examined the creature's head carefully. On the side of its skull he found a carved symbol, as though etched into the stone-like skin. The symbol resembled the ancient markings on the bloodstone itself. When Kael touched the symbol, his stone arm vibrated slightly. This symbol, this creature might have been a guardian of the stone, or maybe someone transformed by the energy, leaking from the temple. Kael carefully examined the symbol and turned to Lia. "This symbol, it might be some kind of key. I'm certain it's connected to something in the temple." Lia slung her bow over her shoulder and nodded. "But removing it might activate the creature's energy. We need to be cautious." Using the strength in his stone arm, Kael began prying the symbol from the creature's stone-like skull. It seemed deeply embedded, almost fused to the creature. As Kael applied more force, a faint red glow emanated from the symbol. When it finally came loose, a small wave of energy rippled outward, but the creature remained lifeless. As Kael held the symbol in his hand, he felt the energy from his stone arm resonating with it. The symbol was covered in intricate engravings, written in an ancient language. "I think this symbol will unlock something in the temple or reveal a hidden secret," Kael said. Lia studied the symbol closely and gave a slight smile. "Then, it seems we made the right choice, but we can't be sure what this will bring us." As Kael and Lia approached the temple entrance, they found themselves enveloped in an eerie silence. The doorway was flanked by massive stone pillars, and a heavy stone door carved with ancient symbols stood slightly ajar. A cold draft seeped. Through the opening, Kael felt a faint vibration in his stone arm. "The stone is connected to this place. Something is waiting inside," he muttered. Lia kept her bow ready and replied, "Let's be careful. Nothing about a place abandoned for this long could be normal." Kael widened the opening slightly and stepped inside. The temple was cold and dark. Ancient glowing symbols adorned the walls, reflecting faintly off the reddish light emanating from Kael's stone arm. As they moved deeper, a sudden metallic noise echoed from the ground. "Some kind of trap, maybe," Lia said, her eyes scanning the floor. Kael realized they'd need to proceed cautiously before they could understand the purpose of the symbol they carried. Kael stopped and carefully examined the patterns on the ground. He noticed that some of the stones were slightly raised, indicating a possible trap. Lia used the tip of her sword to test one of the stones. As the stone shifted slightly, another. Mechanical sound echoed through the temple. Lia quickly stepped back and looked at Kael. "I think these stones trigger some kind of mechanism. If we step on the wrong one, it could set off a trap." Kael cautiously probed the area with his stone arm. He noticed that the energy in his arm seemed to resonate with some of the symbols in the temple. "These symbols might be guiding us," Kael said. "But one wrong step could spell trouble." Lia nodded. "Maybe the symbols indicate which stones are safe to step on. Let's follow them carefully." The two carefully studied the patterns of the symbols and the arrangement of the stones. Lia used the glow from Kael's stone arm as a guide to determine the safest path. Slowly and deliberately, they moved forward, remaining on high alert. Eventually, they reached an area where the symbols were more concentrated. Kael felt the energy in his stone arm intensify and placed his hand on a stone block covered in symbols. This activated another mechanism, but instead of a trap, it caused a door to open. Kael observed that the open door was made of heavy stone blocks, with symbols forming a distinct pattern. Lia carefully scanned the area around the door and noticed a faint draft of air. "There might be another mechanism beyond this door," Lia said. "This airflow suggests something deeper inside is still active." Kael examined the wall near the door with his stone arm. The energy resonated faintly with the symbols. "These symbols could be a warning," he said. "Look, here's a carved figure. It looks like someone trying to stop others from passing through this door." Lia moved closer to examine the figure. The figure stood with its hands raised, and beneath it was an engraved inscription. Lia read it aloud. "Turn back or surrender your soul." Kael nodded. "It seems like this door leads to a more dangerous section of the temple. We need to understand what we're up against before stepping inside." Lia touched one of the stones near the door, triggering a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside, they found a small tablet. The tablet appeared to be an ancient map of the temple, detailing its structure and the challenges within. Lia studied the map carefully, examining the drawings of the temple's layers. "There are several main pathways here," she said, "but some of them are marked. It looks like dangerous or locked areas are indicated." Kael nodded. "We can use these paths to move more safely, but we need to stay alert. There could still be traps designed to protect this place's secrets." Using the map, they navigated through a narrow passage marked with symbols. The path gradually sloped downward into a dark corridor. Kael felt the energy in his stone arm intensifying. It made him uneasy, but also convinced him they were heading in the right direction. At one point, Lia noticed something unusual. A symbol on the floor didn't match anything on the map. This marking, "It's not on the map. It could be a new trap or something added to mislead us." Kael carefully moved around the symbol and continued forward. The map appeared to guide them correctly, but as they went deeper, the air grew heavier. At the end of the corridor, they reached a large chamber. The room was illuminated by massive crystals hanging from the ceiling, and in the center stood an ancient altar covered in intricate symbols. Kael carefully scanned the area around the altar. The symbols on it resembled those on the bloodstone, but were arranged in a more intricate pattern. Lia began examining the walls of the chamber and noticed some ancient markings. "These drawings on the walls seem to tell a story," Lia said. "A great destruction, the rise of the stones, and in the end some sort of sacrificial ritual." Kael slowly brought his stone arm closer to one of the walls. A faint vibration emanated from his arm, causing the symbols on the wall to glow dimly. It was as if the energy was interacting with the ancient carvings. "This must be something triggered by the stone's energy," Kael said, "but we need to figure out what this ritual is about." In the corner of the room, they found several ancient tablets scattered on the floor. The tablets were written in an old language that seemed to describe the altar's purpose. Squinting to read, Lia began deciphering the text. "To release the power, sacrifice is required. The energy can only be controlled by those who harmonize with it." Kael took a deep breath. "It sounds like this altar might be some kind of test, but we have no idea what kind of sacrifice it's asking for." Lia nodded, signaling that they should devise a plan before interacting with the altar. If this triggers the stone's energy, Rushing into it could have serious consequences. Kael carefully scanned the area around the altar, moving toward the far corners of the room. Lia ventured into the darker parts of the chamber, inspecting the floor and walls closely. After some time, Lia discovered an inconspicuous recess in one of the walls. It was small, just big enough for a slender hand to fit inside. Next to it was an engraved inscription, which she read aloud. "The source of power is revealed through unison. Only the chosen may touch." "This could be important," Lia said, "but we don't know what needs to be united." Kael spotted a small stone lying a few meters away from the recess. The stone was etched with symbols and emitted a faint red glow, similar to the bloodstone. When Kael touched it with his stone arm, it vibrated slightly. "This stone might be connected to the recess," Kael said. "Perhaps it needs to be placed there first." Lia carefully examined the stone and noticed a small symbol embedded within it. The symbol matched the one they had taken from the creature's head earlier. "We could combine it with the symbol," Lia suggested, "but if we do this wrong, it might trigger the energy here." Kael knew he needed to decide whether to proceed with linking the stone and the symbol before taking any further steps. Kael carefully took the symbol and combined it with the stone Lia was holding. When the two pieces connected, a red light emanated from the stone and the symbols etched into it began to glow. "It feels like these pieces were made for each other," Lia said, "but this light could mean the energy is activating." Kael hesitated for a moment before firmly placing the stone into the recess. As the stone settled into place, the temple trembled slightly. Symbols on the walls began to glow, filling the room with a dim red light. Lia stepped back cautiously, observing the room. "That vibration feels like it triggered another mechanism," she said. Kael noticed a hidden panel opening behind the altar. The panel revealed a narrow passageway, leading to a deeper part of the temple. At the end of the passage, intricate symbols were etched into the floor, and what appeared to be an energy barrier shimmered faintly. "I think this stone brought us here," Kael said, "but this passage might not be entirely safe." Kael stepped closer to the energy barrier and noticed that the vibrations in his stone arm intensified as he approached. The barrier pulsed with a reddish energy and emitted a faint hum. "This barrier is connected to the stone somehow," Kael said. "The energy in my arm is reacting to it." Lia examined the barrier more closely. She noticed small symbols around its edges, glowing rhythmically. The symbols resembled those carved into the surrounding walls. "These might be some kind of code or lock," Lia said. "If we can figure out the correct sequence, we might be able to deactivate the barrier." Kael slowly extended his stone arm toward the barrier. The barrier trembled slightly, and its red light seemed to draw energy from his arm. However, it didn't fully open. "It's like a door," Kael said, "but it seems to need more energy to unlock." Lia pulled out the map again, studying the symbols around the barrier. "According to the map, this barrier is the only way to reach the heart of the temple. If we can't solve this, we can't go any further," she said. Lia carefully examined the symbols around the barrier. The symbols glowed in a specific sequence, seemingly tied to the barrier's energy. She opened the map and tried to match the energy patterns with the symbols. "These symbols are like a language," Lia said. "It might be a code from before the Great Ruin." Kael felt the vibrations in his stone arm growing stronger. "The stone's energy aligns with these symbols. If we figure out the correct order, the barrier might open." Lia noted the sequence in which the symbols flashed and compared it to the patterns on the map. "There's a pattern here," she said. "These three symbols might be the key." Kael used his stone arm to gently touch the symbols. They lit up briefly, but when he touched one out of order, the barrier trembled slightly and withdrew its energy. "We need to be precise," Lia said. "The wrong sequence might make the barrier even stronger." Guided by Lia, Kael touched the symbols in the correct order. The first symbol, the second, and then the third. A brilliant light emanated from the barrier, and the vibrations suddenly ceased. The barrier slowly dissipated, revealing the passageway. "We did it," Lia said, "but we have no idea what's waiting for us inside." As the barrier vanished, a long corridor dimly illuminated by an eerie glow appeared before them. Kael and Lia moved forward cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the silence. There was no wind, No sign of life, only the overwhelming stillness. Kael felt his stone arm vibrating more intensely. "This place, we're getting closer to the source," he whispered. At the end of the corridor, a massive door stood before them. The symbols carved into it were far more intricate than any they had seen before, pulsing with a strange, almost living energy. In the center of the door was a marking similar to the one on Kael's stone arm. Lia narrowed her eyes. "I think we'll need to do something to open this." Kael hesitated for a moment before extending his stone arm toward the door. The moment he did, the symbols came to life, and the massive door slowly creaked open. Beyond it lay a vast chamber. At its center hovered a massive crystal, similar to the bloodstone but far larger and radiating a powerful energy. Then, from the corners of the chamber, towering stone statues began to stir. Their eyes glowed with the same eerie light as the crystal. Lia quickly reached for her weapon. "I think we've just become unwelcome guests." Before reaching for his weapon, Kael focused on his stone arm. The energy from his arm resonated with the massive crystal in the center of the room. As the statues moved slowly, the light in their eyes grew brighter. Lia whispered cautiously, "They're not attacking. At least, not yet." Kael took a deep breath, raising his arm and trying to attune himself to the energy radiating from the crystal. His stone arm began to pulse faintly. Suddenly, a deep metallic voice echoed through the chamber. "Who has come here?" Kael's eyes widened as he realized the voice was speaking directly into his mind. The statues paused, their movements slowing. Lia kept her eyes on Kael. "Is it communicating with you?" Kael felt a strange connection forming in his thoughts and tried to respond. "I am Kael. We have come to uncover the secrets of this temple. We seek to understand and control the energy of this stone." A moment of silence passed before the voice echoed again. "The stone can only be wielded by those who are worthy. Those who seek its power must be ready to sacrifice." Kael looked down at his stone arm. Did these words mean he was being tested? Lia still gripped her sword tightly. "What kind of sacrifice are you talking about?" Kael asked. The statue's eyes glowed once more, and the crystal at the room's center radiated an even stronger light. "The time for a choice has come." Kael took a deep breath and noticed the rhythmic glow in the statue's eyes. The energy from the crystal pulsed through the chamber, but the statues had not attacked. "Yet, what is the sacrifice?" Kael asked, his voice steady. For a moment the statues remained silent. Then the crystal emitted a stronger glow, and the voice echoed once more. "Power is never given without cost. Those who wield the Bloodstone's energy must bear its burden. In the past, those who sought its power were not ready to pay the price." Lia frowned. "That doesn't sound good," she whispered. Kael glanced down at his stone arm. "What exactly is this burden?" The crystal pulsed brighter as it answered. "To control this power, you must give up either your memories or your body. Lose your past and forge a new path, or sacrifice a part of your physical self to strengthen your power." Kael and Lia stood in silence. The choices had become clear. Either Kael would lose part of his memories, or he would make a physical sacrifice to gain more power from the stone. Lia gave him a solemn nod. "This is a bigger decision than we thought. You need to think carefully, Kael." Kael took a deep breath and looked at his stone arm. "I can't lose my memories," he said. "My past defines who I am. If I have to pay a price, it will be a physical one." The crystal pulsed brighter, and the statues ceased their movements. The energy within the chamber shifted, and Kael felt an immense pressure on his stone arm. "Your choice is made," the metallic voice declared. "Now accept the power." Kael suddenly dropped to his knees as his stone arm vibrated violently. A wave of pain surged through his body as he felt his arm growing heavier. Lia rushed to his side, but knew she couldn't stop what was happening. Kael's stone arm began to glow intensely. His flesh, bone and muscle hardened further, spreading past his shoulder. The transformation wasn't just in his arm. It was creeping further up his body. The pain was sharp but brief. Kael clenched his teeth and pushed himself back to his feet. As he moved his arm, he felt an overwhelming surge of power. The stone's energy coursed through him, but there was no turning. Back now, Lia looked at him with concern. "Kael, are you okay?" Kael stood silent for a moment, then clenched his fist. "I feel stronger than ever." The crystal emitted one final pulse of energy as the voice spoke again. "You have taken the power, but the cost may not only be physical. This power will change you." Kael didn't fully understand what that meant, but there was no turning back now. Kael could feel his newfound power pulsing through him in waves. His stone arm no longer felt like just an extension. It felt like a part of him. But he noticed the concern in Lia's eyes. "I won't test it here," Kael said firmly. "I need to understand what we're dealing with before I try to use this power." Lia nodded. "Then let's move forward. But stay sharp." Kael and Lia moved around the massive crystal and found a descending stone staircase leading deeper into the temple. The air was heavy and cold. Their footsteps echoed, as if something was calling to them. At the end of the corridor they came upon a massive door. The symbols etched into it resembled those on Kael's stone arm. But there was something different. This door seemed to pulse, almost as if it was alive. Lia carefully examined the carvings. "Do you know how to open this?" Kael raised his stone arm toward the door. Instantly the symbols glowed, and a bright red eye appeared at the center of the door. "You, the one who has accepted the power," a metallic voice echoed. "Now it is time to learn your true inheritance." The door slowly creaked open, revealing a vast chamber shrouded in darkness. But within the shadows, faint silhouettes of figures stood waiting. Lia gripped her sword tightly. "We're not alone." Kael clenched his stone fist and stepped forward. "Stay ready." Kael felt the energy from his stone arm resonating throughout the chamber. The figures remained motionless, their presence faint but unmistakable. Lia stepped closer, her eyes sharp with caution. "I'm going to try speaking to them," Kael whispered. "We need to know if they're enemies or something. Else—" Lia gave a slight nod but kept her hand on the hilt of her sword. Kael took a step forward and raised his voice. "I am Kael. We've come here to uncover the secrets of the Bloodstone. Who are you?" Silence filled the chamber, but after a few moments, one of the figures stirred. It stepped forward from the shadows, its form vaguely human, but with skin. That looked like solid stone. Its eyes glowed red, just like Kael's. "You are one of those who bear the burden of the stone." Kael clenched his fist, glancing down at his arm. "This power was given to me at a cost, but I still don't understand its true nature." The figure slowly nodded. "This power was our curse." Lia frowned. "What do you mean?" The figure leaned back slightly. "We too were chosen once, but this power will change you over time. It will transform your body and your mind. If you have chosen this path, there is no turning back." Kael took a deep breath. "Then, you are the previous wielders of the stone." The figure nodded. "And now, we offer you a choice." Kael listened carefully but didn't rush into a decision. Instead, he observed the figures more closely, trying to understand their true nature. They had stone-like bodies that faintly glowed under the temple's dim light. Some had lost all recognizable human features, while others still retained the shape of their former selves. Lia stepped closer to Kael and whispered, "Are they really past wielders? Or are they something else twisted by the stone's energy?" Kael studied their eyes. Each one had the same red glow, the same energy that pulsed within his own stone arm. Yet none of them had shown aggression so far. The leading figure spoke again. "If you have questions before making your choice, ask them now." Kael decided to ask about the nature of the stone's power. "How did this power change you?" he asked. The figure answered in a deep, resonant voice. "At first it seemed like a gift. We became stronger, more resilient, faster. But over time our bodies began turning to stone. Not just physically, our souls changed as well. We forgot who we were. Some of us accepted it, while others fought against it. But the transformation was inevitable." Lia frowned. "What about you? You can still talk. How did you resist it?" The figure lowered its head slightly. "I fought against the change. I struggled to hold on to my soul. But there is a cost. I cannot fully control the stone's power." Kael pondered the figure's words. If the transformation was truly unavoidable, he would either have to accept it or fight to maintain his sense of self. just as this figure had. Kael took a deep breath and looked at the figures. "I've accepted this power, but I don't want to lose who I am," he said firmly. Lia stood behind him, watching silently. One of the figures tilted its head slightly. "You wish to resist?" "That is the hardest path." Kael clenched his fists. "Even if my body changes, I will keep my mind." The leading figure stepped back slightly, its glowing eyes fixed on Kael. "If you truly choose to resist the transformation, you must create a bond to counterbalance the stone. Power, if left unchecked, will consume you." Kael furrowed his brow. "What kind of bond?" The figure slowly bowed its head. "A conscious mind can balance the stone, but this is only possible through your own will. If you lose yourself, even for a moment, the stone will take over." Kael turned to Lia. She gave him a small smile. "I think you already found the right path," she said. "Just remember, you're not alone." The figure raised its hand and sent a beam of light toward Kael. "If you resist, you will not walk this path alone. But every choice will either bring you closer to control or to being lost within the stone's power." Kael nodded, feeling the energy within him shift. This was no longer just about power. It was about holding on to who he was. Kael listened carefully to the figures and then stepped forward. "If this stone's power is going to stay with me, I need to learn how to control it," he said. "Teach me how to form this bond." The leading figure slowly nodded. "A conscious mind can suppress the chaos of the stone. But to do so, you must strengthen your own will." Lia asked curiously, "How exactly does that work?" The figure raised its hands, and the large crystal in the center of the room began to glow. "The stone's power overtakes those who lack control. If you wish to wield it, you must create a mental connection with it. You must use the power not by instinct, but by intention." Kael looked down at his stone arm. The red glow from his arm mirrored the energy in the chamber. "How do I do that?" The figure responded. "There are two paths. The first is through constant awareness. You must discipline your mind to remain in control at all times, shaping your emotions and thoughts." Lia tilted her head slightly. "That could take a long time." The figure continued. "The second path is through a bond. If the stone's power is shared with something or someone, the energy becomes balanced. This bond can be with another person or an object of significance." Kael nodded thoughtfully. This was a major decision. Kael gave the figures a determined look. "I will control this power with my mind, but at the same time, I will use an object to stabilize my energy," he said. Lia nodded. "That makes sense. But what object will you use?" The leading figure stepped closer to Kael. "If you truly choose mental discipline, you must maintain it long term. However, the object you choose for your bond is crucial." Kael reached into his pack and pulled out a small stone he had carried since childhood. It was a keepsake from an ancient cave he had once explored with his father, a reminder of his past and identity. The figure examined the stone and nodded. "This stone is a reflection of your soul. If you channel your energy into it, your power will remain more stable. But remember, if this object is damaged, the bond may weaken." Kael gripped the stone tightly and took a deep breath. "I accept this. I will strengthen my mind and use this as my focus." The figure nodded. "Then begin the ritual." Kael extended his stone arm forward and closed his eyes. In his mind, he could feel the energy flowing through him. Slowly, without losing himself, he directed it toward the stone. The small rock began to glow faintly, and the weight in his arm lessened slightly. Lia held her breath. "Kael, did it work?" The figure closed its eyes, sensing the energy. "The bond is formed, but this is only the beginning. If you lose control, the stone may still take over." Kael opened his eyes, feeling more balanced than before. But he knew he still had much to learn. Kael held the stone in his palm, feeling the faint vibrations running through it. It was as if it was in sync with his mind. Lia approached him cautiously, her expression a mix of concern and determination. Are you sure you want to test this now?" she asked. Kael nodded. "If I'm going to use this power, I need to understand its limits." The figures stepped aside, silently making way for them. The leading figure gave Kael one final look. deeper you go, the more your power will test you. If your will is weak, the bond may break. Kael narrowed his eyes and nodded. I'm ready. A large door leading deeper into the temple slowly creaked open. Inside, darkness reigned except for a single pillar of swirling light hovering in, the center of the chamber. Kael and Lia cautiously stepped inside. The moment they took a step forward, the ground trembled. Massive stone arms emerged from the depths of the ceiling, and enormous statues hidden within the walls began to move. Kael felt his energy ripple again. This temple was still alive. Lia quickly drew her weapon. Are these more guardians? Kael raised his stone arm, trying to sense the energy within the room, but this time it was resisting him, as if these guardians had been awakened specifically to test his control over the power. The guardians moved, forward with heavy but deliberate steps. Each movement shook the ground, their stone armor cracking slightly as they advanced. Kael raised his stone arm, focusing his energy. Lia quickly drew an arrow and aimed for the nearest guardian's joint. We need to find their weak points. Kael nodded. I'll keep them distracted. You find an opening. Kael channeled his energy and lunged at the first guardian. He swung his fist with all his strength, slamming into its chest. The impact sent the guardian staggering backward, but didn't fully knock it down. However, Kael could feel the stone's energy flowing through the strike. He could use this to his advantage. Lia fired an arrow at one guardian's knee joint. The arrow struck true, causing the guardian to stumble slightly. They have weak spots, but they're tough. One of the guardians raised a massive stone arm and swung it toward Kael. He barely dodged, but the impact still sent him skidding back a few steps. His stone arm felt heavier, but he tried to maintain balance through his energy bond. Decision time. Kael could unleash his full power to take down the guardians, but he would need to carefully manage his energy to avoid losing control. Kael clenched his stone fist, analyzing the movements of the guardians. Lia's arrows were striking their targets, but they needed to find more precise weak points to deal real damage. They're heavy and slow, Lia said as she swiftly moved back. We can use their weight against them. Kael watched their movements carefully and noticed something. The stone guardians were repeating specific motion patterns. Their attacks followed a mechanical rhythm. Kael turned to Lia with a grin. If we can guide them into the right angles, we can make them crash into each other. Lia nodded slightly. Then we need to get them moving. Kael slammed his stone arm into the ground, sending a shockwave through the chamber. The guardians immediately turned their attention to him and began marching forward. At the last second, Kael dodged to the side, causing the lead guardian to step directly into the path of another. Lia, keeping her distance, drew an arrow and aimed at the knee joint of the guardian at the back. When the arrow struck, the guardian lost its balance and stumbled forward, colliding directly with the one in front of it. One guardian wobbled and leaned onto the other, triggering a chain reaction. Kael seized the opportunity and delivered a crushing blow to the weakest guardian's joint. The guardian collapsed with a deafening crack, its stone form shattering upon impact. Lia, breathless, called out, "I think it's working." Kael quickly scanned the remaining guardians. If they guided their movements carefully, the guardians could be made to destroy each other. Kael turned to Lia. "Let's not destroy one of them," he said. "We need to understand what activates them and how they can be controlled." Lia, looking both surprised and intrigued, nodded. "All right, but how do we do that?" Kael raised his stone arm and focused on one of the guardians. Instead of fighting, he used his energy to analyze its movements. The bond in his arm resonated with the temple's energy, allowing him to sense the power within the guardian. The guardian slowed down slightly, as if it was responding to Kael's energy. Lia whispered, "I think you're connecting with it." Kael took a deep breath and directed his energy toward the guardian. It suddenly stopped moving. The red glow in its eyes dimmed. It was waiting for a command. Kael felt a strange echo in his mind. The energy inside the guardian was still active, but it was no longer hostile. These entities weren't mindless. They operated based on specific instructions. Kael stepped back slightly. "I think these are ancient guardians," he said. "They're controlled by a system that regulates the temple's energy." Lia, carefully, approached the guardian. "Then if we give it the right commands, maybe we can control them." Kael focused his stone arm and directed a small pulse of energy toward the Guardian. A thought echoed in his mind. Awaiting command. Directives can be given. Kael had the chance to take control of this Guardian, but he had to decide how to use it. Kael raised his stone arm toward the Guardian, carefully channeling his energy. Lia stood back, watching intently. Kael felt an echo in his mind, as if an unconscious presence was opening itself to him. He closed his eyes and connected the energy of the stone to the Guardian's core. Suddenly visions flooded his mind. A dark temple, deep caverns, the shadows of an ancient civilization. The temple was once a living city. Enclosed by massive stone walls, it was a place filled with giant crystals that controlled energy. The people used the stone's power to build grand cities and lived in harmony with nature. But then, the great ruin came. Kael felt a massive explosion in his mind. The stone's energy spiraled out of control, tearing through the sky like a falling star and destroying everything. The city was erased, and those who remained turned to stone. The Guardians were left behind to protect the remnants of their lost civilization. They had once been people. Now they were nothing but soulless sentinels bound to their eternal duty. Kael gasped and opened his eyes. Lia was looking at him with concern. "Kael? What did you see?" Kael took a deep breath and answered, "This temple was once a living city. The people here harnessed the power of the stone, but a disaster wiped everything out. Now only these Guardians remain." Lia narrowed her eyes at the Guardian. "So, these things were once human?" Kael nodded. "Yes, and this place, it was the center of the catastrophe. But something was still missing." Kael remembered a symbol he had seen within the Guardian's memory. It was engraved above a great door, hidden deep within the temple. This could be where the true source of the stone's power was sealed. Kael turned to Lia. "There's a place we need to go. I saw a door leading to the deepest part of the temple." Lia took a deep breath. "Then we go deeper." Kael took a deep breath and, after studying the Guardian, turned back to the figures. "I saw the door. It's deep within the temple, but we don't know what's behind it." Lia stood beside him and added, "We need to know what we're facing before we go any further." The leading figure remained silent for a moment before speaking in a deep voice. "The door leads to the source of the stone. It is where the power was born, but it is also where the catastrophe began." Kael furrowed his brow. "The source of the stone?" The figure slowly nodded. "This city once belonged to a civilization that harnessed the stone's energy. They built grand structures, shaped nature, and controlled immense power. But over time, the power consumed them. They could not control it." Lia listened intently. "So what's behind the door?" The figure exhaled slowly. "The source is still active, but those who touch it must pay the true price of the stone. The door can either release this energy or seal it forever." Kael and Lia exchanged glances. This wasn't just an exploration. It was a moment of choice. Kael looked at his stone arm. If he reached the source, could he fully control the stone's power, or would it consume him as well? Lia tilted her head slightly. "We need to do this, but we shouldn't rush it." The figure gave Kael one final message that echoed in his mind. "Before you open the door, you must decide. Will you claim the powers or seal it away?" Kael took a deep breath. They were nearing the end of this journey. But the most important decision had yet to be made. Kael took a deep breath and looked at his stone arm. "Is this power only something to take or seal away?" he asked. "Is there another way?" The figures fell silent. The air in the room grew heavy. Lia turned to Kael. "What do you mean?" Kael faced the figures. "This stone once served the people, didn't it? If it was uncontrollable, why was it used?" The leading figure remained silent for a moment before speaking. "Power is never dangerous on its own. The danger lies in how it is used." Kael furrowed his brow. "Then why couldn't you control it?" The figure lowered its head. "Because we tried to rule it, but we never learned to live with it." Lia tilted her head slightly. "So, this power wasn't a curse," the figure responded. "Power is just a tool, but to live in harmony with it, You must first understand its nature. Kael felt the energy of the stone within him. This energy didn't have to be destroyed or fully controlled. Maybe balance was possible. So, is it possible to create balance instead of taking or sealing it away? Kael asked. The figure stared at him in deep silence. If you can do that, you will forge a new path. Lia gave a small smile. Then let's open the door and see what we're dealing with first, Kael nodded. But this time the power must not control us, we must control it. Kael turned to the figures. This door leads to the source of the stone, but we don't know how to open it, he said. Instead of opening it blindly, we need to understand its mechanism first. The leading figure nodded. This is a choice that requires wisdom. As Kael and Lia gathered around, the figure raised one hand, causing the symbols on the door to glow faintly. This door can only be opened by those who are in harmony with it. Lia frowned. What does that mean? The figure took a deep breath. The source of power reflects the will. Energy alone is not enough to open the door. The one who seeks to open it must understand the nature of the power itself. Kael looked at his stone arm. This was not just a physical test, it was a spiritual one as well. The figure continued. The door has 3 layers. The first responds to the strength of the bearer. If the energy is uncontrolled, the door will not open. The second layer reacts to mental clarity. If the person is uncertain, the door will remain sealed forever. The third and final layer requires a choice. Lia listened carefully. What kind of choice? The figure slowly turned to Kael. When the door opens, 2 paths will appear. One will seal the stone away forever, the other will unleash its full power. But there is a third path. If you learn to wield the stone's energy properly, the door will reveal a new option. Kael took a deep breath. How do I unlock this third path? The figure touched Kael's stone arm. That is for you to decide. If you can control your power and guide it, the door will respond. But be warned, even the slightest imbalance could make the process irreversible. Kael and Lia exchanged glances. This was not just an exploration. It was a trial that would define their fate. Kael took a deep breath as he looked at his stone arm. We shouldn't make this decision now, he said. It wouldn't be wise to seal or claim this power without truly understanding it. Lia nodded. Yeah, when we came here, we didn't know what we were facing. But now we realize that this power isn't our enemy. Yet if we don't understand how to use it, it could become dangerous. The figures watched them in silence. The leading figure turned to Kael and asked, Do you choose to abandon this path? Kael closed his eyes for a moment before speaking. No, I'm not abandoning it. But right now, I don't have enough knowledge to make this choice. The figure nodded. Understanding this does not make you weak. It means you know what true strength is. The door will remain here. When you are ready, you may return. Kael and Lia exchanged glances. This wasn't a retreat. It was a conscious choice. They took one last look at the temple's massive gates before slowly stepping back toward the world outside. Beyond these walls, they would learn what this power truly was, how they could coexist with it, and how it would shape their fate. Kael and Lia stood at the threshold of the ancient temple, staring into the unknown. Instead of making a hasty decision, they chose another path, one of discovery. They needed to understand not only the world, but also the true nature of the power they now carried. As they stepped out of the temple, the air around them thickened. The world they had left behind was gone. Instead, they found themselves in a cold, mist-covered forest. The sky was an endless sheet of grey, and the wind carried the mist in slow, twisting currents, making it difficult to see more than a few steps ahead. Lia instinctively reached for her bow, her sharp eyes scanning the shifting fog. She lowered her voice. This isn't where we came from. Kael frowned, flexing his stone-infused arm. There was too much energy inside that temple. Maybe it displaced us when we left. The trees around them were ancient, their massive roots stretching across the ground like the veins of some long-forgotten titan. But there was something unsettling about them. Some roots twisted unnaturally, as if recoiling from something unseen. The deeper they looked, the more apparent it became. This place was wrong. and the silence. The absence of sound was suffocating. No birds, no rustling leaves, no distant hum of life. Just the soft whisper of mist brushing against bark. Lia took a cautious step back and nocked an arrow. "Something's here," she murmured, "watching us." Kael's stone-covered arm pulsed faintly, a low vibration running through his bones. He had felt this before, an omen of something lurking just beyond the edge of perception. But this time, the sensation was different. Not wild and uncontrollable like before. This was deeper, older. Lia knelt by the roots of a towering tree, brushing her fingers over the damp soil. "This isn't normal," she whispered. Kael reached out, placing his hand against the rough bark. The stone's energy surged through him, and suddenly, visions clawed their way into his mind. Echoes of the past. Shadows flickered in the mist. Ancient hunters locked in a brutal battle against monstrous bone-plated creatures. Some of the beasts were dragged underground, disappearing into the earth. A hidden passage. Beneath the tangled roots, a fracture in the ground pulsed with an unseen force. A gateway to something buried, forgotten. The unknown threat. A figure. Emerged from the haze, a being of stone and flesh, its body fully petrified except for its glowing hollow eyes. Its gaze locked onto Kael. Lia suddenly straightened, her breath sharp. Some of the trees had been cut down, but not by axes. The gashes in their trunks were massive, jagged, left by claws. "Something big is out here," she whispered. "And if it's still around, it already knows we're here." Kael clenched his stone-covered fist, his pulse quickening. "This place was a battleground once, and I think it still is." Moving cautiously through the mist, Kael and Lia followed the deep claw marks that marred the earth. The tracks were massive, gouged deep into the soil. Whatever left them, it didn't belong here. It had been brought here. Lia crouched, pressing, her palm against the ground, feeling for warmth, for age. "These tracks, they're fresh," she whispered. Kael's arm vibrated again, the stone's energy flickering beneath his skin. It was trying to warn him, but the message was unclear, fragmented. Then a shift, a flicker in the mist. Lia reacted instantly, lowering herself and drawing back her bowstring. Kael's eyes darted upward, movement in the trees. Something was watching them. Lia's whisper was barely audible. "It knows we're here." Kael tensed. The presence, it felt wrong, familiar, yet alien. As if whatever was out there had once been like him, before it lost itself to the stone's power. And then it attacked, a blur of motion. A monstrous shape burst from the mist, moving faster than anything that size had the right to. Muscles coiled. Under its half-stone, half-flesh body, its twisted frame radiating an energy too similar to Kael's own. But its eyes, there was no control. No humanity left. Only hunger. Kael barely had time to react. He raised his stone arm just as the creature lunged, their impact sending a deafening shockwave through the trees. The force knocked the beast back, but not for long. It recovered unnaturally fast, its body twitching as if fighting against itself. Lia loosed an arrow. The creature twisted mid-air, dodging with an unnatural grace. The arrow embedded itself into a tree, missing its mark by a breath. Kael gritted his teeth. "It's not just strong, it's fast." The creature let out a guttural snarl, its massive frame shuddering. Cracks formed along its stone-covered limbs, as if the transformation itself was unstable, an eternal battle between flesh and rock. Kael knew, in that moment, what this thing once was. A person. Lia saw it too. "If we don't stop it, we're dead." Kael made his move. He slammed his stone fist against the ground, sending out a powerful shockwave. The beast hesitated, just for a heartbeat. It was enough. Lia fired. This time her arrow struck true, piercing the creature's exposed flesh. A piercing, unnatural shriek echoed through the mist, but the monster did not fall. Kael didn't hesitate. He lunged, swinging his stone-covered fist in a final crushing blow. A sickening crack. The creature staggered back, its red-lit eyes flickering, dimming. It took a few shaky steps, its form struggling to hold itself together. Then finally it collapsed. Silence. Kael exhaled, his pulse still hammering in his ears. Lia lowered her bow, her fingers still tight around the string. What the hell was that? Kael stared down at the motionless body. The mist curled around it, swallowing it whole, as if the forest itself refused to acknowledge what had just happened. "I don't know," he muttered. "But whatever it was, I don't think it was the only one." Silence fell. Kael and Lia stood over the creature's motionless body. Was it truly dead, or was something else happening? They weren't sure. Leaving it behind would have been the easy choice, but without understanding what this transformation was, they had no way of knowing what other dangers lay ahead. Kael took a deep breath, extending his stone-covered arm. As his fingertips brushed against the creature's body, a strange sensation rippled through him. Lia crouched beside him, carefully inspecting the wound left by her arrow. This thing, it had been human once. But what had happened to it? The body was still warm, yet lifeless. Kael's stone-infused arm trembled faintly, as if whispering to him. He closed his eyes, trying to channel the energy, listening to what the stone wanted to show him. A rustling sound. The crack of stone breaking. A scream. Kael's eyes snapped open. Lia was watching him intently. "What did you see?" she asked. Kael's voice was heavy. "This creature. It was once human. But the stone's power consumed it." Lia frowned. "How is that possible?" "Your arm turned to stone, but you're still human." Kael exhaled slowly. "Because I resist it. But this one, it lost itself." Lia studied the creature's face. Parts of its skin had hardened into stone, yet some areas remained organic. Then, does that mean the transformation can be reversed? Kael clenched his fist. If this creature had once been human, then understanding how the stone transformed them could mean understanding his own fate. But how? His gaze fell upon his own arm. If the stone's energy had the power to corrupt, maybe, just maybe, it could also be turned back. Lia's voice was cautious. "Are you sure about this?" Kael nodded. "I have to try. If I can reverse it, then I might not just save this creature. I might save myself." Lia hesitated, then took a step back, her hand resting on her sword. If something went wrong, she needed to be ready. Kael knelt beside the creature, placing his stone-covered hand against its chest. This time he didn't try to force the stone's energy. Instead, he moved with it. A current of power pulsed between them. The creature's body trembled. The hardened stone shifted, fine cracks appearing, not in destruction but in restoration. Lia's breath caught. "Kael, I think it's working." But something was wrong. Kael's head swam. Guiding the energy was far more difficult than he expected. He wasn't controlling it, only directing it. And now the power was pushing back. The creature let out a ragged breath. The red glow in its eyes flickered, fading. At the same moment, Kael's arm ignited with unbearable heat. A sudden shockwave surged through his veins, his stone-infused flesh pulsing with an unnatural fire. The stone wasn't just responding, it was fighting back. The energy was rejecting him. Kael gasped, pain shooting through his body. What had begun as a steady current was now a raging flood, threatening to consume him whole. His vision blurred. The creature was healing. The stone's grip on it was weakening. He was succeeding, but at what cost? Lia's voice cut through the haze. "Kael, stop!" His teeth clenched, his body trembled under the strain. His instincts screamed at him to hold on, to finish what he started. But if he did, he might not come back. The energy was taking its toll, demanding its price. With one final act of will, Kael tore his hand away. The connection snapped like a severed thread. A violent pulse of energy erupted from his arm, sending him staggering backward. He hit the ground hard, rolling onto his back as the world spun around him. Every inch of him burned. His heart pounded in his ears. His breath came in ragged gasps. Lia was already at his side. "Kael, are you okay?" His arm felt heavier than ever. The stone had darkened, its surface rougher, as if punishing him for his failure. Had he only made things worse? Lia turned toward the creature. It was breathing. Some parts of its body had returned to normal, but the stone had not vanished completely. Kael swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. I did it, but not completely. Lia's brow furrowed. And you? Look at your arm. Kael lifted his stone-covered limb. It pulsed faintly, different now, unstable. He had succeeded, but only halfway. Lia placed a hand on his shoulder. You almost died, Kael. If you had held on any longer... I know, he muttered. This had been a brutal lesson. His power wasn't just dangerous, it was unpredictable. He had tried to control it, and in doing so nearly lost himself. He wasn't ready. But this had proven something. The transformation could be reversed, and that meant hope. Kael stared at his heavy, stone-infused arm. The energy within it had shifted. It was no longer the same. Lia, too, was deep in thought. This creature isn't dead. We can learn from it. Kael nodded. If it was once human, then it might be our key to understanding how the stone works. But one question remained. Was this creature the only one, or were there more? Kael and Lia exchanged a look. They had to find out. As Kael knelt beside the creature again, studying the still pulsing veins of stone running through its form, Lia noticed something else. Kael, look at your arm. He followed her gaze. The patterns on his stone-covered veins were identical to those on the creature. Lia narrowed her eyes. This could be some kind of contagious energy. Kael's stomach tightened. If that was true, then his battle against the stone was far from over, and he might not be fighting it alone. Kael's thoughts swirled. His connection to the stone had become a part of him, but the creature, it had lost that connection. Mindless, consumed entirely by the stone's will. Kael placed a cautious hand on the creature's chest, focusing, trying to sense the energy. Within, and then, he heard an echo, screams, a forest, people running, a hidden cave. For a fleeting moment, Kael was somewhere else, not in the present, but in a fragment of memory, one that did not belong to him. Beneath the rocks, concealed, from the world there was an ancient cave. Kael's eyes flew open as he gasped for breath. Lia's gaze sharpened. What did you see? Kael didn't know exactly where it was, but he could feel it. There's a cave here, he said quietly, and within it a greater source of the stone's power. Lia's expression hardened. If there's more knowledge there... Kael nodded. Then we need to find it. The creature trembled slightly, but its consciousness had not returned. Kael's energy had not been enough, but within the cave, perhaps they could find answers. The visions left him momentarily dazed. The stone was trying to tell him something. But where exactly was the cave? He had no map, only instinct. Lia noticed the change in his expression and rested a hand on his shoulder. Do you know how to get there? Kael exhaled slowly. Not exactly, but something happened here, and that cave is at the heart of it. Lia scanned the area. If there really was a cave, someone must have known the way. Kael rose to his feet, glancing once more at the fallen creature. Maybe the forest itself would reveal the path. As they moved through the mist, Lia crouched and examined the ground carefully. If they could determine where the creature had come from, they might find the cave as well. Deep claw marks were embedded in the earth, but they weren't the only tracks. Lia traced a finger over one of the prints, her voice barely above a whisper. There are other tracks here. Kael knelt beside her, studying them closely. Human footprints, but the pattern was strange, as if something or someone had been dragged. Someone was being moved, Kael murmured, running his fingers along the disturbed earth. Or something was being pulled here. Lia's brow furrowed. Maybe this creature was captured before it fully transformed. Kael's jaw tightened. If that's true, then the cave isn't just a source of knowledge. It's where victims of the stone are taken. Lia's eyes swept their surroundings. Then we follow the tracks, but we stay cautious. Kael inhaled deeply. This path could lead them to answers, or to something far worse. Rather than rushing toward the cave blindly, they decided to move strategically, studying every clue. Understanding the cave's nature could mean the difference between survival and disaster. Lia knelt again, pressing her palm against the ground, analyzing the depth and direction of the prints. At least 2 people came this way, she murmured. One could be the creature, but the other, these footprints look human. Kael nodded. Maybe whoever they were made it to the cave. If they're still alive, they might know what's inside. As they studied the tracks more closely, something else caught their attention. Blood Kael and Lia tread carefully, following the crimson stains until they noticed deep scratch marks carved into the tree trunks. Someone, or something, had clawed at the bark in sheer desperation. Lia narrowed her eyes. Whoever was dragged, they were fighting back. Kael clenched his stone-covered fist. A battle had taken place here, but who was fighting whom? Lia followed the blood trail until they reached a rocky clearing, and there, someone was there, slumped. Against the base of a tree, a figure lay motionless. Kael rushed forward, dropping to his knees. He pressed 2 fingers to the person's neck. The pulse was weak, but still there, a half-stone man, just like Kael, but his transformation had progressed further. Lia scanned the surroundings. If he made it this far, the cave can't be too far away. Kael could hear the man's faint, uneven breathing. His eyelids fluttered, but he was too weak to speak. Then Kael saw it, a symbol carved into the man's chest, a glowing mark of the stone's power. Kael had seen it before, in the temple. This man knew the stone's power. Lia knelt beside him, gently shaking his shoulder. If he's alive, he can tell us something. Kael reached out, his stone-infused arm barely grazing the man's. A vibration pulsed through him, an echo of something deep. And then, the man's eyes fluttered open. His voice was weak, almost a whisper. You carry the stone's curse. Kael's stomach tightened. This man knew. Lia pressed urgently. Where is the cave? What's inside? The man's gaze seemed distant, lost in old memories. You're too late. That place. It's being used to awaken him. Kael's breath caught. Who? The man trembled, his arms tightening around himself. We sealed it away, but the stone always finds a way. Kael and Lia exchanged a tense look. The cave wasn't just a place of secrets. Something had been sealed inside. The man's voice trembled. If they open the gate, more will turn, just like us. Kael stared at him. If this was true, then the stone wasn't just a source of power, it was a disease. Lia looked between the injured man and the forest beyond. We can't leave him here, he won't survive. Kael took a deep breath. We can't take him straight to the cave either. He's too weak. Lia nodded. We need to find shelter, keep him alive first, then find out what's in that cave. The man's consciousness wavered, his breath unsteady. Kael carefully lifted him onto his back. He was lighter than expected. Lia slowly unsheathed her sword, scanning their surroundings. We've made too much noise. We're not alone out here. Kael adjusted his grip, speaking in a hushed voice. Then, we move quickly. With the weakened man on his back, Kael and Lia pressed deeper into the forest. The mist was thinning, but the air remained heavy with tension. Lia took the lead, eyes sharp, searching for shelter. After a while, they came across a natural rock formation with a hollowed-out space beneath it. Lia pressed her palm against the stone. This should keep us hidden, but we can't go too far from the cave. Kael carefully laid the man down. His breathing was uneven but stable. The storm was far from over, and the cave still waited. Lia sprinkled some water on the man's face, gently shaking him. "Can you hear us?" she whispered. The man let out a faint groan, but didn't open his eyes. Kael's voice was tense. We can't wait much longer. If something is sealed in that cave and someone is trying to open it, Lia sighed. Then we need to keep him alive first. If we go in blind, we have no idea what we're up against. Kael clenched his stone-covered fist, his gaze drifting toward the direction of the cave. Time is running out, but we can't leave him behind. He watched the half-petrified man struggle for breath, knowing they were racing against something. Unseen, this man might know the truth about the cave. But in his current state, he couldn't speak, couldn't warn them. Kael looked at his stone-infused arm. This power had been a curse to him, but maybe, just maybe, It was the key. Lia turned to him as if sensing his thoughts. "What are you thinking?" Kael took a deep breath. "If I can't wake him, I might be able to reach his mind." His voice was resolute. "If I use the stone's energy, I might see what he's seen." Lia's expression darkened with concern. "Kael, you've never done that before. If you lose control, you could get trapped inside." "I know." Kael's voice was steady. "But we don't have a choice." Lia hesitated, then slowly nodded. "If something goes wrong, I'll pull you back." She rested her hand on the hilt of her sword. Kael knelt beside the man and carefully placed his stone-covered hand over the man's petrified veins, and then he channeled the energy. Kael's arm pulsed with light, a gentle vibration at first, but then his mind reeled. He was falling. A void, a scream, then a vision. Kael was no longer in his body. When he opened his eyes, he was inside a cave. But not the cave as it was now. This was the past. Torches lined the walls. The half-petrified man knelt in the center. Others surrounded him, all marked by the stone's touch. And at the heart of it all, a massive seal. Echoing voices filled the air. "We have to keep it here. If it wakes, the world will never be the same." Kael stepped closer. Within the seal, a figure loomed. Human, yet not. Half-petrified, towering, radiating an ancient power. This was the true source of the stone. Kael tried to see its face, to understand, and then the memory shattered. His mind was yanked back. Kael gasped as he came to, Lia's blurred face hovering over him. "Kael, can you hear me?" He inhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. His body was back, but his mind felt fractured. Lia's hands gripped his shoulders. "What happened? What did you see?" Kael's voice was low, filled with grim certainty. "There's something inside the seal. The stone's power comes from a being that was locked away, and if that cave is opened, it will be freed." Lia's eyes widened. "So we're not just trying to understand the stone's energy. We're guarding a prison." Kael nodded. "Yes, and someone is trying to break the seal." Suddenly the man inhaled sharply. His eyes snapped open, and he whispered, trembling, "It might already be too late." Kael's stomach twisted. If something was truly sealed away, then whatever they had fought so far was only the beginning. Lia crouched beside the man, gripping his shoulder. "What do you mean? Tell us everything." The man's dazed eyes flickered as he fought to gather his thoughts. His voice came in weak gasps. "We didn't just seal it. We erased it." Kael and Lia exchanged a wary glance. Kael's voice was steady. "What is it? How is it connected to the stone?" The man took a deep breath, his face etched with fear and regret. "Thousands of years ago," he began, his voice hoarse but steady, "we were the first to wield the stone's power. We tried to understand it, to live with it. But one of us—" Kael noticed how the man avoided saying the name. He sought to unravel the stone's greatest secrets, the man continued. "But this power was never meant to be controlled. The stone, it consumed him just like your arm." Kael instinctively glanced at his petrified limb. "He was human once," the man murmured, "but then he changed. Before we could stop him, he was no longer one of us." Lia swallowed hard. "And then what? How did you stop him?" The man's expression darkened. "We fought." Kael stiffened. "But you couldn't kill him, could you?" The man shook his head. "No, we sealed him, but it was only a temporary solution." Kael exchanged a glance with Lia. "And now the seal is breaking." The man lowered his gaze. "You felt it, didn't you? The stone isn't just a source of power. It's connected to the being inside. If it awakens, the stone's power will no longer be yours to control." Kael's mind raced. If that was true, then his inability to fully control his own transformation wasn't a flaw. It was because the stone itself was bound to something greater. If this thing woke up, the stone's power would spread unchecked. Lia gripped the hilt of her sword. "Is there a way to stop it?" The man hesitated. "Killing it may be impossible, but it might be possible to turn the stone's power against it. Kael nodded. Then we have to seal it again. The man locked eyes with him, whispering, "To do that, you'll have to face it." Kael and Lia both realized the risk. Charging into the cave without understanding the past would be reckless. If it had been sealed once, there had to be a way to do it again. Kael spoke firmly. "If there's a way to reinforce the seal, we need to learn how. The more I understand the stone's power, the more I can control it." The man studied Kael carefully, then whispered, "This power can only be wielded by one who carries it." Lia narrowed her eyes. "Are you saying Kael is the only one who can do this?" The man gave a faint nod. "But he must learn. The cave holds the knowledge of the original seal, but part of it was moved." Kael's eyes flashed. "What do you mean?" The man lifted a weak hand, gesturing slightly. "In this forest, there is an ancient stone tablet. It holds the remnants of the sealing ritual. If you find it, you may learn how to strengthen the seal without repeating past mistakes." Lia straightened. "Where is it?" The man took a shaky breath and pointed west. "By the lake, buried beneath the earth." Kael and Lia knew this tablet might be their best chance. The cave was too dangerous to enter blindly. If the seal fully broke, it might be impossible to stop what was inside. Kael crouched beside the man. "Who hid the tablet?" The man closed his eyes slightly. "Others like us." But very few survived. A chill ran down Kael's spine. That meant others had once carried this curse, and most of them were gone. Lia tightened the straps on her sword. "Then we move. We don't have time to waste." Kael left a small flask of water beside the man. "Stay. Here, if we succeed, we'll return." The man's half-lidded eyes barely moved as he whispered, "Find it before the seal breaks. Because once it does, the stone will no longer obey you, it will obey him." A shiver ran through Kael's body. If the seal shattered, he wouldn't just lose control. The stone might no longer be his at all. Taking a steady breath, Kael and Lia turned west, making their way toward the lake. Beneath one of the fallen columns, the stone tablet was buried. Kael's eyes snapped open as he took in a sharp breath. "There was a structure here," he said urgently. "The tablet is buried under one of the columns." Lia straightened. "Then we need to find those columns." They began scouring the lakeshore, searching for any remnants of the old structure. After nearly half an hour of careful searching, they found it. An old moss-covered column, tilted slightly, its surface worn by time. Kael ran his fingers over its cracked surface, and that's when he saw it. An ancient symbol etched into the stone, the same seal as before. Lia crouched beside it, brushing away some of the moss. "If we dig here, we should reach the tablet." Kael nodded, but remained cautious. If something was sealed here, there might be protective mechanisms in place. Digging blindly could be dangerous. If this place was connected to the sealed power within the cave, then there could be traps, magical barriers, or hidden guardians protecting it. Lia traced her fingers over the carved markings. "These symbols, they match the ones we saw in the temple." Kael extended his stone-infused arm, reaching toward the column, trying to sense the energy within. A faint vibration, a ripple of energy, and then a presence, deep beneath the earth. Something was here. Kael narrowed his eyes. "This isn't just a burial site. This place is a sealed chamber." Lia exhaled. "If there's a mechanism, we need to disable it before we start digging." Kael pressed his stone-covered palm against the column, focusing, and then whispers rising between the columns, chains tightening, the distant echo of a door unlocking. Kael quickly pulled back. This place might have a fail-safe mechanism to prevent anyone from retrieving the tablet. Lia frowned. "So, if we just start digging, we could set something." "Off?" Kael studied the ground, the way the rocks and soil had settled over time. If there was a trap, there had to be a way to disable it. Then he felt it. A faint depression in the earth just beside the column. A pressure plate. Kael could feel the way his stone-infused limb reacted to it. This wasn't just a mechanical trap. It was connected to the stone's power itself. Lia stepped back. "Kael, are you sure? If you trigger it, we might activate something worse." Kael took a slow, steady breath. "There's no other way. If we want to get to the tablet, we have to make this place safe first. Carefully, he knelt beside the depression, placing his stone-infused hand on the ground. He focused, not pushing, energy outward, but instead listening to the vibrations of the seal. At first, nothing happened. Then, the stone pulsed beneath his touch. A memory. A sealing ritual. The binding of the stone's power. Something struggling to break free. Kael's breath caught, but he forced himself to focus. The seal recognized his energy. Slowly, the pressure plate shifted. A faint groan of stone echoed from within the column. Kael carefully withdrew his hand, his body tense, and then the plate fully disengaged. No collapse. No surge of magic. The trap was disabled. Lia hurried to his side, eyes wide. "You did it! Nothing triggered!" Kael exhaled, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Yeah, but this seal is more complicated than we thought. It's not just keeping something hidden, it's locking away the stone's power." Lia's brow furrowed. "So, the stone's energy isn't completely free. It's contained somehow." Kael looked down at his own arm. That would explain why he couldn't fully control the power coursing through him. If the seal truly acted as a lock, then breaking it completely might unleash something they weren't ready for. Lia pulled out a small digging tool. "All right, we can start uncovering the tablet now." Kael nodded. The trap was disarmed, but this was only the first step. Even though they had disabled the immediate threat, the energy protecting this place ran deep. If there were other mechanisms in place, they needed to be prepared before pulling the tablet out. Kael pressed his stone-covered hand against the column, again carefully feeling for any remaining energy signatures. A faint pulse, then a whisper. Chains shifting. The same ancient voices from before. And then, just a few feet away, a faint glimmer in the dirt. Lia's eyes sharpened. "Kael, look!" Kael crouched, brushing away the loose soil, and beneath the earth, a second seal. Half buried, they uncovered. A stone disc, its surface etched with the same markings as the column. But unlike the other seals they had seen, this one had a slot in its center, as if something was meant to fit inside. Lia ran her fingers along the edges. "Is this a lock?" Kael frowned. "If it is, then we need to open it before we can reach the tablet." Lia carefully examined the engravings. If this is another seal, just digging it out might not work. If we break it the wrong way, we could damage the tablet itself. Kael's mind flashed back to the temple. If this seal was truly holding back the stone's power, then there were only two ways to open it: channel the stone's energy properly, and unlock it from within. Find a mechanical way to release the lock. If they chose wrong, the consequences could be severe. Kael flexed his stone-infused fingers. If this seal reacted to the stone's power, then maybe, just maybe, he could guide it open rather than forcing it. Lia watched him closely. "Kael, if you make a mistake, this seal could break completely." Kael nodded. "I have to try. If it's tied to the stone's energy, then I have to attune myself to it." Lia stepped back, gripping the hilt of her sword. She was ready to act if something went wrong. Kael placed his stone-covered palm into the slot in the center of the disc, and he let the energy flow. At first, nothing. Then, a tremor. The engravings on the disc glowed with a deep, crimson hue. Kael's breath hitched. The energy wasn't responding as he had hoped. It was pulling something from him. The seal wasn't just protecting what was inside. It was feeding off it. And then, a voice whispered into his mind. "You are like me." Kael's chest tightened. This voice wasn't external. It was inside him, a presence, a consciousness that had been waiting. Kael clenched his jaw. "Who are you?" The voice let out a soft, amused chuckle. "That doesn't matter, but you? I've seen others like you before." Kael took a step back, heart pounding. This thing, whatever it was, knew the truth about the stone's power. "You think you control the stone," the voice murmured. "But the stone is shaping you." Kael gritted his teeth. "You're lying." "Am I?" the voice mused. "Then tell me, why can't you command it? Why does it resist you?" A flicker of doubt crept into Kael's mind. Was this thing right? If the stone was truly connected to whatever was sealed away, then what would happen? If the seal broke, Kael's vision blurred as he felt something tugging at him, pulling him deeper. This being, it was aware, and it had been waiting. Kael had assumed breaking the seal would simply release knowledge, but if they broke it completely, then this thing would no longer be trapped, and it would be free. Kael took a deep breath, trying to pull his energy back from the seal. If he didn't stop now, that entity could consume his mind entirely. But breaking free was harder than he expected. His arm, his stone-infused arm, felt as if it had fused with the seal itself. Lia, noticing Kael's trembling form, rushed to his side. "Kael, can you hear me?" Kael clenched his jaw, shutting out the whispers from the presence inside the seal. Summoning all his willpower, he yanked his energy back in one final, desperate effort. The seal's glow flickered, then died. Kael was thrown backward, landing hard on the ground. Lia was beside him in an instant, gripping his shoulders. "Kael, are you all right?" He gasped for air, his eyes darting to his stone-covered arm. Something had changed. The glow that once pulsed through his veins, a deep crimson, had shifted. Now it was darker, colder, a deep midnight blue. Kael swallowed. The seal remained unbroken, but the entity within it, now it knew him. Kael stared at his arm. This wasn't just a change in color. The energy felt different. Lia, still catching her breath, looked at him with concern. "Why did you do that? You almost lost yourself." Kael's mind was still ringing with the entity's voice. It was still there. Closing his eyes, he reached out. "Speak to me. What are you?" Silence. Then, finally, "You accept me." Kael's consciousness was yanked from his body. He found himself standing in a vast empty void. Before him a massive shadowed figure loomed, its form shifting between flesh and stone. It was like him. But where Kael bore a single petrified arm, this being was fully consumed. Kael squared his shoulders, refusing to show fear. "Who are you? What is your connection to the stone's power?" The entity's lips curled into something resembling a smile. "I was like you once, a man." Kael's heartbeat quickened. "What happened? I believed I could wield the stone's power, but the stone has its own will, Kael, and that will is greater than us." Kael's hands curled into fists. "You were sealed away. There must have been a reason." The entity tilted its head. "They feared me. They did not understand. This power is not just for destruction, but those who could not control it chose to bury it instead." Kael's chest tightened. "Then why did the stone choose me?" The being leaned forward slightly. "Because you have not yet given yourself to it, but you will, in time." Kael shook his head firmly. "I won't become you." The entity let out a low chuckle. "We'll see, Kael. The stone chose you, but have you chosen it?" Before Kael could respond, a force yanked him backward. He gasped, his vision snapping back to reality. Lia was gripping his shoulders, shaking him. "Kael, you were unresponsive for a whole minute." Kael's breath was ragged, but the voice, the entity, still echoed faintly in his mind, and he realized something. It wasn't just a monster, it had been human. Once. Kael inhaled deeply. "That thing, it used to be like me." Lia's eyes widened. "What?" Kael nodded slowly. "It wielded the stone's power, but eventually it turned completely to stone. That's why it was sealed." Lia's expression hardened. "Then if the stone's power is fully unleashed, you could end up like it?" Kael hesitated. The entity's words echoed in his mind. "The stone chose you, but have you chosen it?" He clenched his jaw. "No, I will be different." Lia studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but first, we need to retrieve that tablet." Kael exhaled, glancing down at his arm one more time. This power would not dictate his fate. Kael focused, extending his stone-infused arm toward the earth beneath them, where the tablet was buried. The veins in his arm pulsed, not crimson, not unstable. This time the glow was steady, controlled. Lia watched cautiously. If you connect with that entity again, can you pull yourself back? Kael nodded. This time, I'm the one in control. If the stone was now a part of him, then he had to learn to command it, not be ruled by it. Kael let the energy flow into the ground. At first, the light was soft. But then, the earth responded. Rocks shifted. The soil trembled. Kael could feel the ancient mechanisms moving beneath them. Then boom! The ground shuddered. Lia staggered back. Kael, what's happening? Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, revealing the massive stone tablet beneath them. But something felt wrong, Kael realized too late. The stone was still pulling him in. He tried to withdraw his energy, but the stone's power wanted more. A voice whispered in his mind. Are you ready to claim my power, or to become it? Kael froze. For a brief moment, he considered it. Then his jaw tightened. No, this power belongs to me. With one final surge of willpower, Kael ripped himself free. The ground stilled and, before them, the ancient stone tablet lay exposed. Lia rushed to his side. You did it! The tablet is out! Kael exhaled, gripping his arm. This time, he had won. But the stone was still testing him. Kael and Lia knelt beside the massive stone slab. Its surface was rough, worn by time, but engraved with ancient markings. Kael rubbed his arm absent-mindedly. The power had tried to pull him deeper, but this time he had resisted. Lia ran her fingers over the carvings. These symbols, they matched the seals we saw in the temple. Kael leaned in closer. If this tablet really contains the sealing ritual, then it should tell us how it was done. Lia nodded. But how do we read it? These inscriptions aren't in any language we know. Kael's brow furrowed. He remembered the engravings in the temple. Some of them looked similar to what he had seen before. He pointed to a circular symbol in the center. This is a sealing mark, Lia frowned. How do you know? Kael's voice was quiet. Because I saw it in my mind. As they studied the carvings, Kael realized the tablet had 3 sections. The first set of symbols detailed the steps of the ritual. 4 energy stones were required. They had to be placed in a circle to bind the stone's power. The person performing the seal needed to be fully connected to the stone's energy. Kael's mind raced. This explains why the stone bonded to me. To seal something, the person must be attuned to its power. The second inscription was a caution. If the one performing the ritual succumbed to the stone's will, the seal could be reversed. If the seal broke, the stone's power would fully awaken. Kael's blood ran cold. This is why that entity was sealed, because it completely surrendered to the stone. Lia's face was grim. So if the seal breaks, it's not just the entity that will be released. The stone's full power will be too. Kael nodded. Darid. The bottom of the tablet was a final phrase. The stone's will can only be sealed by another will. Lia's breath caught. Does that mean the person sealing it must sacrifice themselves? Kael stared at the words. Maybe that's why the stone still tests me. The real question was, if the time came, would he be willing to pay that price? Kael stared at the stone tablet, his mind racing. Sealing the stone's energy came at a cost. But what exactly was that cost? And was it truly unavoidable? Acting without understanding the full consequences would be reckless. His gaze drifted toward the ancient ruins and the lake's edge. If the tablet had been hidden here, this place must have been part of an old ritual site. Lia ran her hands over the moss-covered stones, searching for any clues. If this was a sealing ground, there should be more symbols or inscriptions. Kael nodded and began his search as well. Then, behind one of the fallen columns, his fingers brushed against something, a carved stone, half buried, as he turned it. Over, more inscriptions were revealed beneath. Lia quickly came over. What did you find? Kael studied the engravings. They contained knowledge that wasn't on the main tablet. The seal does not merely hold the stone. The stone's will is bound. During the sealing, Lia narrowed her eyes. What does that mean? Kael clenched his petrified fist. I think it means that the person performing the ritual has to form a direct connection to the stone's energy. Lia exhaled. That sounds dangerous. If the stone bonds with the one sealing it, that person might become a part of the seal itself. Kael nodded grimly. That's why the one who performed the ritual had to be in complete control of the stone's energy. Otherwise, the seal would reverse itself. As Kael and Lia deciphered the new inscriptions, they realized the ritual had 3 critical phases. The binding of will. The person performing the ritual must consciously connect with the stone's energy. 2. The balance. Energy stones must be arranged in a circle, and the person sealing the power must transfer their will into the seal. 3. The lock. If the ritual isn't completed properly, the stone's energy could reflect back onto the one sealing it, taking control of them instead. Kael and Lia exchanged uneasy glances. Kael clenched his fist. If I perform this ritual, the stone's energy could bind itself to me, and if I lose control, Lia finished his thought, the seal could shatter, or worse, the stone could consume you. Kael took a slow breath. This was a test, not just of power but of will. If he failed, he wouldn't just lose control, he would become another vessel for the stone. Lia tightened her grip on her sword. If the seal is already breaking, we have to act fast. If we wait too long, we might be too late. Kael nodded. We know what we have to do, but we still don't know what's waiting for us inside that cave. Lia smirked slightly. No matter what, we won't let that stone take you. Kael glanced down at his stone-covered arm. The energy inside it was different now. It strengthened him, but it also threatened to take control. He inhaled deeply, then turned to Lia. Let's go. The forest was thick with mist as they moved quickly toward the cave. The sun was beginning to set, and Kael knew, if the seal was weakening, the cover of night would only accelerate its collapse. Lia glanced at him. If something goes wrong, during the ritual, what do we do? Kael's voice was steady. If I lose control, you have to sever the stone's connection. Lia pressed her lips together. And if I can't? Kael hesitated before answering. Then you may have to kill me. Lia immediately shook her head. That won't happen. You're not going to lose. Kael gave a small smile. Let's hope you're right. And then they reached the entrance. The cave mouth was lined with jagged rocks, half covered in moss and shadow. But the most unsettling sight was the cracks running along the stone walls, faintly glowing. Lia crouched beside them, running her fingers over the fractures. The seal is failing. Kael exhaled. Once we're inside, we won't have much time. The collapse is already happening. Lia tightened her grip on her blade. Are we expecting resistance? Kael closed his eyes, feeling for any lingering energy. He didn't just sense the presence of the sealed entity. There was something else, something moving. We're not alone. Lia's fingers brushed his arm. Whatever happens, we do this together. Kael nodded. Then let's begin. And they stepped into the darkness. Kael and Lia knew they couldn't immediately start the ritual. If the cave held traps, or worse, something guarding the seal, they needed to find it before it found them. Kael turned to Lia. We need to scout. First, if there's something else here, it could attack us during the ritual. Lia nodded. Agreed. We can't afford to be vulnerable. As they moved deeper, the air grew thicker, heavier. The walls pulsed faintly with old magic. Kael's petrified arm tingled. Something was here. Lia ran her fingers over the walls. People have been here before. This place isn't abandoned. Kael narrowed his eyes. If someone is trying to break the seal, they might still be inside. Then, a sound. A faint shifting noise from the darkness behind them. Kael froze. Lia immediately unsheathed her blade. Did you hear that? Kael gave a tight nod, raising his stone-infused arm defensively. A shadow flickered, moving deeper into the cave. Kael's voice was a whisper. We're not alone. Lia moved quietly, following the movement. And then, the ground trembled. Kael grabbed Lia's arm, pulling her back as an energy surge rippled through the cave walls. The ancient inscriptions glowed to life, Lia whispered. These are remnants of the original ritual. Kael raised his hand, feeling the pulse. Then a whisper. "The seal is opening." Kael and Lia exchanged sharp glances. The seal wasn't just weakening, it was actively unraveling, and now, they weren't the only ones inside. Kael turned to Lia. "If someone else is here, they might be trying to break the seal." Lia raised her sword. "If they're working against us, they could attack mid-ritual." Kael nodded, stepping forward. The narrow corridor ahead led into darkness. The air grew colder. Then, a figure, kneeling before an ancient symbol, examining the cave's inscriptions. Kael and Lia shared a glance. Then, Kael took a step forward. The moment his boot scraped the stone, the figure turned. For an instant, Kael saw something familiar in the man's gaze, but his eyes were laced with stone. A hushed voice broke the silence. "You have come to restore." "The seal?" Lia tensed, blade raised. "Who are you?" Slowly the man rose to his feet. "I was here before you. I have sought the secrets of this seal." Kael watched him carefully. "If you know its secrets, why aren't you protecting it?" The man smiled faintly. "Because this seal was never meant to protect us." Lia's grip tightened. "What are you talking about?" The man exhaled, watching the faintly glowing walls. "The seal was never just a prison. It was a beacon. Those who made it knew it would never last forever." Kael's stomach clenched. "So, it was always going to break." The man nodded. "And you have come to stop it." Lia stepped forward. "And you? Are you here to help? Or to break it further?" The man glanced at Kael's petrified arm. A small smile. "I cannot stop it. But you may be able to command it." Kael felt a chill run down his spine. This man knew too much. But was he a friend or an enemy? Kael took a deep breath and stepped closer to the man, his voice firm. Was this seal truly made to be broken? The slight smile on the stranger's face faded. "No, but those who created it knew it wouldn't last forever." Lia narrowed her eyes. "So the seal was designed to weaken over time?" The man nodded. "The seal had two purposes. First, to imprison the entity. Second, to wait for someone who could fully control it." Kael's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" The man met his gaze. "This seal wasn't meant to hold it forever. It was meant to wait for someone to release it and take control." Lia immediately cut in. "And you think that person is Kael?" The man tilted his head slightly. "I don't know, but the stone's will seems to have chosen him." Kael clenched his stone-infused fist. Ever since he had gained this power, he could feel it. The stone was trying to bond with him, but was that bond meant to give him control, or was it meant to consume him? Kael exhaled. "Can we reinforce the seal?" The man hesitated. "Yes, but it won't be easy." Kael frowned. "Why?" The man placed his hand against the cavern wall. "Because the seal is already breaking. If you don't act fast, the entity will be completely free." Lia turned to Kael, urgency in her eyes. "Kael, we don't have much time." Kael nodded. "What's the exact method to reinforce it?" The man's expression darkened. "To do that, you'll have to face the stone's will." Kael's breath hitched. That meant facing the entity directly. The man continued. "If you fail, the seal will break entirely, and then it won't just be the entity that awakens. The stone's essence itself will be unleashed." Kael and Lia exchanged looks. They had to stop this. But how? Kael turned back to the man. "What are the risks? What exactly are we up against?" The man's gaze darkened. "You will face its will." Lia's voice was sharp. "Explain." The man sighed, gesturing toward the ancient inscriptions on the cave wall. "The stone's energy isn't just a source of power. It has a consciousness. To seal it, you must make it submit to your will." Kael glanced at his petrified arm. "And if I fail?" The man closed his eyes. "Then the stone's will overtakes you, and the seal reverses." Kael swallowed hard. If he lost control during the ritual, the stone could consume him, and if that happened, not only would the entity escape, but Kael himself might become part of it. Kael took another step forward. "Tell me exactly how this ritual works. What do I need to do?" The man sat down, studying the cave's inscriptions. "There are 3 stages." Lia and Kael listened intently. You must channel the stone's energy into the seal. But you must not unleash its will. Feel the stone, but do not let it control you. The stone's consciousness will speak to you. It will test you. If you falter, it will try to bind you to itself. If you resist the stone's will, you can reactivate the seal. But if you lose control, the seal will shatter and the entity will awaken. Kael's mind raced. This wasn't just a physical ritual. It was a battle of wills. Lia crossed her arms. And what if something happens to Kael during the ritual? What do I do? The man locked eyes with Kael. If he starts to lose, you have to pull him back. But if the stone takes him... Lia's breath caught. I have to kill him? The man's expression was grim. If the seal reverses, you'll have no choice. Kael inhaled deeply. This was a fight he couldn't afford to lose. Lia turned to him, eyes filled with concern. Kael, are you sure about this? Can you do this? Kael clenched his fist and nodded. We have no other option. We have to stop this. The man slowly stood, watching Kael carefully. Then let's begin. Kael and Lia now understood what had to be done. The seal was weakening rapidly, and delaying further would only bring disaster. Kael tightened his grip on his petrified arm, feeling the energy ripple beneath the surface. This would be his greatest test. Lia adjusted the grip on her sword and met his gaze. Are you ready? Kael nodded. We have to stop this. The man gestured toward the center of the cavern. Stand there. The ritual begins in that spot. Kael stepped forward. As he crossed the threshold, he felt it, the stone's energy pulsing beneath him. A deep vibration echoed through the earth. The man's voice was steady. Listen carefully. The first stage requires you to fully align with the stone's energy. But whatever you do not lose control. Kael took a deep breath. How do I start? The man pointed to his petrified arm. Direct your power into the seal, but keep your will firm. Do not let the stone take you. Lia, watching from the edge, gripped her sword. If anything goes wrong... Kael gave her a small smile. Pull me back. Lia nodded, her knuckles white against the hilt of her blade. She would be his last line of defense. Kael knelt down, placing his stone-infused hand against the ancient seal. The moment he touched it, a surge of energy erupted. His vision went black. When Kael opened his eyes, he was no longer in the cave. He stood in a vast, endless void, and he was not alone. A towering figure loomed before him, half flesh, half stone. The sealed entity. The creature's glowing eyes locked onto Kael, and a deep, resonating voice spoke. You two have come to close the seal. Kael stood his ground, fists clenched. Yes, you will remain here. The entity tilted its head. A cold smile crept across its face. And what if I refuse? Kael felt it. The entity was testing him. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a battle for dominance. If Kael faltered, even for a moment, the entity would take control. He exhaled, channeling the stone's power. You will be held here by my will. The seal is stronger than you. The entity took a step forward. Is that what you believe? A sudden wave of energy crashed into Kael's mind. His knees buckled, but he did not fall. The stone was tied to him now. He had to command it. The entity's voice was like a storm. The stone chose you, but can you truly command it? Kael's jaw tightened. I don't need to prove anything. I will do it. He released a burst of energy from his petrified arm and forced the entity backward. The cavern shook. The glowing runes flared to life. The entity did not retreat in fear. It laughed. So you will become like me? Kael froze. What do you mean? The entity's gaze drifted to Kael's arm. You can use the stone's power to bind me, but the more you use it, the more it will change you. Kael's breath caught. If he used much of the stone's energy, would he become part of it? Lia's voice echoed from the real world. You can do this, Kael. Kael gritted his teeth. This seal will not break. He unleashed his full willpower, a final pulse of energy. The seal shut and the world went silent. As the man bid them farewell, he spoke one final time. If you truly wish to learn the stone's origins, then you must travel north. There lies a place where knowledge and forgotten history are kept. Kael and Lia exchanged a glance. The north.